Well, I'll just start off by reading the intro. Uh, dyslexia, dyslexia, dyslexia. What a horrible way to spell a name for a group of literacy handicaps. I am dyslexic. I can't spell it. Dyslexia affects an estimated 15 to 20% of the population. Formatting to enhance the enjoyability of reading for this audience and writing from perspective of dyslexic authors. Is it all bad, or are there hidden compensations? So why don't we just go around and introduce ourselves? I'll lead off. I'm Stephen B. Pearl. I currently have 11 novels published. It will be 13 by the end of the year. And I was diagnosed as being dyslexic when I was six or 7 years old. And I went completely through the mill with the educational system. And I still have major difficulty spelling, but you do what you have to do. And I also have, in conjunction with my publisher Brainlag, my Freedom saga, Cloning Freedom, Freedom's Law, and upcoming Freedom's Myth, all come in a dyslexia-friendly format. And that's me. Robert?
Hi, I'm Robert Runt. I'm senior editor at Essential Edits. And I didn't find out I was dyslexic until my mid-40s. I found out because my daughter was diagnosed as dyslexic, and the psychologist who diagnosed her said, "Oh, which parent has it?" And everyone in the room turned and looked at me, which was the first time I realized, oh, that explains a lot that happened in my life. Because I had my daughter and then also figuring things out for myself a little better as I got older, I have some advice I can help people as an editor with dyslexia. But I'm also an education prof, now retired, and I find the school response to dyslexia quite mixed. For example, the senior person responsible for disabilities and accessibility in our school district told a colleague that she didn't think it was worth $150 to upload a dyslexic typeface to the school because my daughter was probably the only person with dyslexia in the entire system. So compare that to your estimate of 15 to 20%. And I think it suggests something about the ignorance about dyslexia that's out there.
Oh, I know. The overwhelming message that I've received throughout my life is stupid and lazy and careless. And that went through my grade school career, my high school career, and followed me into university. And I had a university prof openly ridicule me in front of a class because he had a hard time. He dropped a pop assignment on us, so I couldn't do it on a typewriter. And he had a hard time reading my work when I didn't have time to vet it properly. So yeah, there is a huge amount of ignorance out there. And it's inexcusable in so much as, well, you're a professional in education, and it's the three major learning modalities. And at least they used to say that basically there were three, and there was one that was something like 48%, and one that was 49%, and one that was 3%. And a lot of people that are called dyslexic are in that 3%. And it really is quite ridiculous. And okay, the ACC host is Sorry. Dan Valdron.
Yeah, that might be me. Hold on a second. I'll adjust the screen so you can see me.
Okay. Well,
All right.
welcome.
Well, for myself, my name is Dan Waldron. I'm a writer. I've got about 20 books out, fiction and nonfiction. Thereabouts. I'm not keeping close track. Written a whole bunch of short stories, a lot of nonfiction stuff. And in real life, I'm an Aboriginal rights lawyer. I'm dyslexic. I was diagnosed in elementary school, and they predicted I'd never be able to write or read. And this was an old Catholic school, so they basically stuck me into the special needs branch, or the special needs class, and ignored us for a while. But somehow I managed to make it through. Dyslexia has had some effect on my life. I think if I wasn't dyslexic, I'd be a physicist or an accountant or something like that. Something more practical. In terms of my day-to-day life, I have to be careful about driving down the wrong side of the road. Haven't done that in a long time. I have to be really careful with numbers. I constantly transpose them or transliterate them. So I'm always double checking that. And you really don't ever want to read my handwriting.
With you on that. I even when I took notes in college and university, I'd print them and I came up with my own shorthand to be able to keep up, which I think is actually one of the big problems, I think, for dyslexics, is that they tell you to take notes in school. So you're rushing to get it down and to write down what the teacher is saying. And you don't have time to make sure the spelling's right. And one of the big things I've found with a lot of dyslexic people, and I mean dyslexia, it's a blanket term. It's a whole group of different conditions, at least as far as I'm concerned. And they all fall under this thing. And what they have in common is their illiteracy, perceptual literacy problems. But, you're racing to get it down, so you misspell it. And that, a lot of the time, the first time that you spell that word, that's what gets encoded as how to spell it. And this racing to take notes at school, I think, really is one of the things that entrenches problems for dyslexics, because if they would just slow down and let you spell properly, give me a handout that has the notes, and then I don't have to write it improperly to try to keep up. That's been one of my issues for a very long time. Well, I always go into these things with some notes, and anybody is free to riff on anything that I say and interrupt. What is dyslexia? Well, I've already said not one thing. One theory that I heard was that the lobes of the brain don't specialize, and as such, they kind of get short-circuited and start contradicting each other, and that's some of the perceptual difficulties that come in. And if that's the case, the first space shuttle was dyslexic. Because if you remember with the first space shuttle, they had multiple computers on it, and they had one that was out of sync with all the others, and it delayed the launch a couple of times. So I like to say I'm in good company,
I think one of the problems we have with dyslexia and the definition is we're still in the process of tweezing that out. When I was a younger kid, so in grade 4 or 5, my brother suspected there was something wrong with my reading abilities. And so he actually did test for me for dyslexia, you know, in an amateur kind of way. He was a classroom teacher, and so he had access. And I didn't show any of those classic symptoms at all, because dyslexia, when it was first sort of discovered, if you will, in the 50s and 60s, were the people who see circles as semicircles, right? So that kind of extreme wrong processing. So cases like mine, I'm actually more dysgraphic than I am dyslexic, were simply undiagnosed. You couldn't diagnose them, right? And even now, there's nothing official or scientific. It's not in the DSM or anything like that, right? So we just have to understand that it's a learning disability related to literacy. But the actual mechanisms, the version I have, the version you have, are actually often quite different. I have a friend who's failed out of university because he could read perfectly well, but he couldn't write. So he had dysgraphia, but that word didn't exist when we were going to university. And then he got around it to some extent by inventing, as you said, his own alphabet that was symmetrical, and therefore he couldn't get confused. And you know, what kind of intellect is able to develop their own writing system up from scratch because it was easier than trying to read English? So, you know, and obviously lots of people with dyslexia are extremely smart. I pity the people who are dyslexic and average or below, right? That then you're really messed up, right? Because you can't come up with workarounds. But we really don't have a satisfactory definition.
Well, I just want to say I'm an observer here, but I've been an observer of children and adults who have dyslexia. And I remember I was at a school, well, actually it was more like what you might call a reform school, because it was a public school that was being run by the police department. And these were children who had been in trouble and they were living in this very controlled environment. And so I had a child who, she came into my computer class. I was teaching computer there for some reason. And she said to me, because they still had those old monitors that were separate from the, she said to me, can you turn the monitor upside down? And I said, why? She said, oh, I always do that so I can read it. And she was perfectly fine. When she turned the monitor upside down, not only was she perfectly fine, but she turned out to be a poet. And she was able to write poetry that way, which is kind of frightening, but there she was sitting there with an upside down monitor and being able to use it. So she found that way. And just recently, I had a student who was going for a GAD, was dyslexic, and she was diagnosed as a child in elementary school, but her grandmother was very ignorant of that kind of thing and did not give her any kind of specialized help. The school didn't give her any specialized help. And so she wound up dropping out. And so she always felt that lost, absolutely lost. And what she does to figure out how to learn anything is that she goes over and over and over everything. Like if there are quizzes and you can take them over and over and over again, that's what she does to learn so that it gets in her brain.
Well, it is a matter of, you have to find what works for you.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the big problems I ran into with the school system, when I went through, they were into this whole thing of, oh, we're going to do the spelling list completely random so that the children don't get bored. I'll tell you something, it's the stupidest thing in the world as far as I'm concerned. Give me a list: bat, mat, hat, sat, cat. That makes sense. there is commonality, and that commonality can be absorbed and learned by rote. And English, they were phonics, phonics, phonics. Well, phonics is great for reading. I say phonetics is great for reading because the logic system of the English language can work in that direction. It is useless for spelling because how many ways are there to make the E sound?
Yes,
But-
because letters, not all letters will sound the same. And therefore, if somebody's having trouble with letters and they see that letter, they're going to think it's one sound, and then in another place in the word, it's going to be another sound. And so children who are having difficulty in reading find it very, very confusing to learn spelling. And that they don't always go together, that good readers are good spellers, but bad readers are always poor spellers, I found, because they're not able to figure out that letter sounds work with the letters that are there. And it comes from the very beginning of teaching children to read.
Yeah.
They are now on this whole thing where they start with phonics. A lot of children cannot understand that way. You need to have phonics, and you also have to go through and show them comprehension. It has to be phonics and comprehension together. And being a reading teacher and having a master's in this field, I will say that part of the problem in reading today is that they are concentrating so much on phonics, and the whole thing is that they've moved so much farther toward that with this new system that so many more children are having difficulty with it. You have to teach whole words. You have to teach sight words, because if you don't teach sight words with phonics, then children do not get vocabulary. They don't get that vocabulary that they need. They may be able to send out a word, but they don't know what it means. When they learn the sight words, that's when they gain vocabulary. That's when they learn to read.
Yeah. Now, have you run into this, Rob? You have an education background.
Yeah, in fact, the problem we're having right at the moment in Alberta is the UCP government being conservative, actually neoliberal, Trump-like idiots, but that's not for today, are bringing in a new K-6 curriculum, which is a back to the basics, rote memorization, and it'll be a disaster for English and reading as much as it's a disaster for social studies, where they took out any mention of the First Nations and so on, right? So things are going backwards. We saw that in the 60s, or not 60s, back in the Reagan era, the back to the basics, right? Which is really saying we want to dumb down education so people will vote for our party. And we've seen the results of that in politics in the States today, right? So it is really bad for the general population. It's of course worse for dyslexics who are struggling anyway when teachers don't understand. As an educator though, and looking at the research, there's a lot more going on in dyslexia than simply the ability to read the printed page or to produce writing. It affects whether you understand calendars. It affects left and right. Obviously, we've all experienced that. It affects our numeracy. It affects our ability to organize. So one of the things I know I struggled with when I was younger was trying to figure out how things flowed. And I saw that in both my daughters. They would try to tell a story, but the connections they were making were not chronological or orderly in any kind of way. It was kind of free association telling of that story. And it was incomprehensible to anybody else. And then, you come back 40 years later and I'm a professional editor. I cannot copy edit for obvious reasons. I can't see the
Mhm.
mistakes, right? But I'm considered one of the better structural editors around because I have this innate sense now, because I had to consciously organize my writing and thinking about it. So even though I'm a complete pantster, everything comes out organized, contrary to what you'd expect from somebody with dyslexia. And I see that with some of my students. I see that um, with my own kids who started out completely hopeless, but having mastered, having learned the workarounds, having figured out sort of basic
Mhm.
templates, and then gone on from that, they're actually way ahead of where their peers are at the same level, in spite of the fact
Yeah.
they had this so-called disability.
Well, because you can't do it instinctively, you have to do it mechanically, and you understand the mechanics, even if it's at more of a gut level. And yeah, I'd agree with that. Den, anything you want to add?
You have to work harder at it. For
Yeah.
me, it's always been like having a boulder inside my head and I can't go through the boulder, so I have to do workarounds, find pathways around it. And that, I think, calls for a lot of deliberation. That's not something you do naturally. It's something you work at, and I think that um, leads to a process of attention and focusing that can make you succeed elsewhere in other ways. You develop tools, intellectual tools to do things. Um, I don't necessarily see that as a broadly good thing because, okay, I developed a set of tools, but the next kid, you know, in may have just dropped out of school.
Mhm.
Exactly like my student.
Yeah. Um, the fact that I developed working tools on my own doesn't necessarily mean that all of my peers in a similar situation did so or did so as effectively. So you know, it's a challenge. It's troublesome. Um, Robert and I and yourself represent, I think, the top end of people who were very successful in dealing with this.
Yeah, people who have managed to cope.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be speaking here.
Mhm.
Yeah, but the whole thing is today, for a child to be considered dyslexic, they have to have gone through a test by a psychologist and been deemed dyslexic. So you can think that somebody's dyslexic, but unless they were referred by the reading teacher to get a test, they may not be considered dyslexic. So it's also very important to understand that there are lots of new schools that are teaching dyslexic children. And I had a little kindergarten girl who was she was moved to first grade, and then in first grade she started having trouble, even though she was learning words from me, sight words. She was having difficulty in school, and the parents decided to get her tested. And I said to them, I said, if she's not learning the way you want, you should have her tested. And they found out that she needed to be in this special school. And I think it has a woman's name, Harriet. I think that's the name of it, something. And so they found that she had a perceptual difficulty that required her to be in a special school, which was, they didn't say it was dyslexia. I guess maybe she was too young to be
Well,
diagnosed.
there is no official diagnosis of dyslexia in the DSM, so psychologists cannot use that word. All they can say is there is a clear literacy disability here, and here's what you can do to deal with it, right? But
Right. So
that's not an official word anywhere in any system.
So they put her in this special school to have extra help in reading. And she needed it because she was having extreme difficulty remembering words, and she just could not function. She had she didn't know some of the alphabet, and even though we kept going over and over again, and she memorized the alphabet, sometimes she couldn't recognize it. No,
Yeah.
on the
Well,
To
page.
this day, when
The
I'm doing
Bs.
filing, I have to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I
Same
was
here.
a shipping and receiving clerk for a while, so
And I
that
have-
was
yeah.
cumbersome.
I have to tell you, as a reading teacher, that is the basis of reading. If a child is missing any letter of the alphabet, any letter, they're going to
Yeah.
have difficulty in reading. I mean, you can't get away with not knowing every single letter of the alphabet and not have some difficulty in reading. And if
I think
Yeah.
we've got a member of the audience. We've actually got quite an audience here, and she's got a comment or question. Could you come up to the microphone, please?
This is going back to the thing where you say about 15 to 20% of people seem to have some form of dyslexia. And I was just wondering, because a lot of it was talking about spelling problems, I don't know which screen to look at. Is that only true in English? Is it higher in other languages? Is it easier if you're Italian, for example, where spelling is a very consistent thing?
It tends to be much lower in other languages. And it is because of the gross inconsistencies in the English language.
Yeah, GHOTI spelling.
totally, English is a very, very difficult language to learn. The consonants change, the vowels change,
Yes,
how they're sounded, the accent changes, everything changes depending on the position of the letters. And
It also,
non-English
the
speakers,
multiple
very
ways of
difficult.
making sounds. That's why I say phonics is great for reading. And I will defend that stance. I think it's wonderful. But for spelling, no. For spelling with English, you basically have to do a rote learning.
Then when you go on to the other part where you say dyslexia also shows up as dysnumeria, which is, I'm not dyslexic, but I can read easily, but arithmetic is not my forte at all. Does that seem consistent with the English language numbers, the numeracy problems? So
That I'm not sure of. I've studied the literacy part side of it. Rob?
I think part of the problem is those statistics are open and controversial. I'd be much more comfortable with a statistic like maybe 10 to 15. 15 is even, many people are questioning it. Partly it's these studies, what was your definition? If you ask how many kids have problems reading, then yeah, it's 20, maybe even 25%. But is it dyslexia or bad instruction or, some other thing? For example, we were totally prepared to deal with dyslexia with my youngest because we'd gone through it with our oldest. So when she showed up with it, well, we thought, okay, we have all those cures. What we didn't know until halfway through grade 6 was that she had a vision problem on top of that. Her eyes can't track across the page. And that, in spite of us having taken her to an optometrist for 5 years saying, are you sure there's nothing wrong with her eyesight? We took her to a different optometrist and he said, why aren't you doing something about the fact she can't track across a page? So in that 20% are probably mixed in a lot of other issues. So then when you start doing studies across cultures, when we can't even get a definition in English we're all comfortable with, I start looking at Chinese characters, which isn't a phonetic alphabet, and ask about dyslexia. Well, there are obviously going to be people who can't process those symbols in the same kind of way, but it's really hard to get any generalization beyond saying, we have a problem. When you identify these kids, there are things we should be doing with them. The actual numbers, they're really still very fuzzy because we still don't have that workable definition. So they've separated out reading and writing as dysgraphia and dyslexia. We separated numeracy out as a separate numeracy. So we're still in the early stages here. By the time we finally get it solved, we'll be done with literacy and we'll all be talking to our computers directly, and it'll be talking. We won't be bothered with writing anymore, right? So
Yeah, for me, my issue was always like left-right transposition. When I was younger, I took boxing, and the thing that drove the coach and other players or other young boxers crazy was that I just switched back and forth between left and right without any real knowledge. I could do a set of combinations, a set of a combination series perfectly, but you'd never tell whether it was coming from the left or the right. I would react from the left to something that was coming from my right. So, and even with numbers, I'm transposing. I do sequence. I can do sequence very well. Once I start on a sequence, then usually I'm fairly good. But I don't think that's language based. It seems to be, it seems to be brain wiring. And I think what I'm hearing, and I've never really given much thought to it, is that, dyslexia may be a catch-all term that describes a number of different things that are going on. So what's going on with me isn't necessarily what was going on with Stephen or Robert.
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. It is a blanket term that's just thrown over a whole group of things. Well, I wanted to address, because it's right in the description, writing for dyslexics. And as I said, my publisher, Brain Lag, with the Freedom Saga, has actually done versions of those books that are targeted for dyslexics. And I've had the good fortune to read them because, well, we all know as authors, you read your own work. You public readings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll tell you, for me, for my particular issues, they read like silk. It is
What
so.
did they do? What did they do to
Well,
change it from regular
There's a
publishing?
few simple things. Left aligned text, slightly larger, instead of a 12 point, maybe a 14 point. Additional spacing between the characters and lines. The book is a little more expensive because it's larger, but it really works out well. Bold text for emphasis, getting away from italics. And this is one thing, I hate calligraphy. I mean, you're looking at these squiggly lines. What the hell is that? Have you seen the cartoon of the wizard with the magic circle in front of him? And there's a lemon sitting in the middle of the circle. And he's got a book open beside him. How to summon and it looks like demon, but it actually is how to summon a lemon. And I hate calligraphy.
Now, can I show you something, Stephen? It's like this book, because this is a large print book. Is this the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, that's along the lines. Slightly larger, like slightly larger print, and
Emphasis with a lot of emphasizing with
emphasizing with bold instead of italics.
right.
So, the convention is that a ship's name is placed in italics. So you place the ship's name in bold.
So this large print book would be something that a dyslexic person could read.
Yes, it's much easier with that. You've got a little bit of space. My wife and I actually had an issue. She loves Excel. She's very good at it.
So is my daughter.
Yeah.
I hate it.
I hate it. I look at that, and unless there are additional spaces between things, everything swims together. And so avoid calligraphy, simple clear fonts, Arial Black, Times New Roman, Courier New. Those work for me. Use an intelligent vocabulary. We're not children and we're not stupid. And I think this is something that, you know, they go, oh, well, if you're having problems reading, read a children's book. And it's sort of,
do that.
why would I want to read a children's book? I mean, some of them are good, but, you know, Harry Potter's okay. But it's not the be all and end all of literature.
Yeah, yeah.
I have it here, individual variation. And this is a thing from my own book. I read very slowly. I read at about 1/4 the rate of speed for somebody with my level of education, which is university. However, I have about 10 times the average retention of what I read, which is how I was able to get through the educational system, because what people were studying and having to read 10 times, you know, read multiple times, I could read once and I could spew the information. And I think this is a fairly common thing, that if somebody is dyslexic, play to their strengths. Find out what strengths they have, because you develop a lot of them. And this is something along the line you were saying, Dan, of you get compensatory mechanisms. And where you can apply them, use that. That's a strength. Unfortunately, my parents were of the opinion that if I did it well, I should be actively discouraged from doing it, and I should be forced to do everything that I was horrible at, because it was good for my dyslexia.
I'm curious, Stephen, just in terms of some of the stuff you've described, do you think that e-books and e-readers are making a difference to people who experience dyslexia? Because you can adjust the font size, you can actually adjust the font, you can adjust the luminosity or darkness of the screen. Yep. You have a lot more control.
I think they have to be.
Texture.
You know, to be honest, personally, I don't like them for pleasure reading, because I work on a screen. And whenever I'm reading on a screen, I'm going, no, I want to rephrase that. I want to edit that. I want to change that. And I get a mental disconnect if I have a paper book, that I can put that aside. But for just the practical realities of it, yeah, I think the e-reader is probably great.
Yeah, if I can say the example of my youngest, in addition to the dyslexia, she also had that vision problem. She can read anything on a phone because the lines are shorter, so she doesn't have trouble to track across the line, and she can blow the type up, she can change the font, and that has led her to reading basically a book a day on her phone. But it drove the other kids crazy, saying, well, how come you get to have your cell phone in the school and we don't? Well, obvious, right? So something as simple and as mechanical as letting her read on her phone has changed her life from a non-reader to a voracious reader. Can I get back to fonts just for a second? I have a font story. When we first found our oldest was dyslexic, there are some dyslexic fonts that are open access fonts, and then there's one you can pay a lot of money for. So before the money one came out, we were trying out the open access, which were sort of designed by people who had dyslexia and it worked for them. So the bottom is weighted higher than the top, so you can tell the difference between B's and D's more easily, that sort of thing. So my kids started using that at school, and the first thing we discovered is that it didn't make a huge difference to her. It was impossible for her teachers to read.
Mhm.
So when they saw her reading something they could not read, they finally got that there was something there physical, not that she was an annoying kid. Does
Mhm.
that make sense? So
Yes.
I happened by coincidence to have two friends who are the top type designers on earth, in my opinion. But one of them, for example, was vice president of Adobe in charge of their fonts. So I asked him, is there anything to this? He said, well, as you would imagine, we did a lot of double-blind research on this stuff. And what we discovered was, in actual fact, it doesn't make any difference to those kids. They have no trouble. But combined with my story, he says what it seemed to show was that it validated them. So psychologically, it was like a placebo effect. And their upside down thing, when I discovered my daughter could read as easily upside down as straight on, that's incomprehensible to a teacher, right?
No,
Mhm.
Well, okay, but I'm saying
I can read upside down now, but
you had to train yourself though,
I
right?
did. Yeah. I mean, I've
But-
read a lot of stuff upside down. So
But for her, it was as easy that way because it's as hard the other way, right?
Mhm.
And
oh yeah, she couldn't read at all. If you had it right across the regular way, she couldn't read. Minute you turn it over, she read everything.
so then an ordinary classroom teacher, not a reading specialist like yourself, it's suddenly they see that there's something going on rather than stupid and lazy, which my kids had trouble with, Steve had trouble, I had trouble. Teacher took my mom aside and said, well, you had two smart kids. So really with the third one at your age, you can't be expecting, he's a little retarded.
Oh, seriously?
Seriously.
Oh, when
So-
I was first tested,
Oh.
this is back in the 60s, they diagnosed me, the school sent us in for this intelligence test. It was all spatial structures. They diagnosed me as borderline mentally retarded.
Yeah.
And they wanted to put me in a class for the mentally retarded. Fortunately, my sister was in university at the time, and she had attended a lecture about this new thing called dyslexia. And she said, well, maybe that's it. And they took me to an actual psychologist and had me tested. And well, that's all she wrote. They came out of the room and said, he is not mentally retarded. There is absolutely no way. Unfortunately, the school system burnt all my records.
What?
Yeah. They decided they were going to clear out their files, and I had gone into them at one point and said, I'd like a copy. And they said, oh, we can't give you that, despite the Freedom of Information Act. And, well, you didn't pay for it. My parents paid for it. It's about me. I have a right to it. But they wouldn't give it up, and I wasn't going to pursue it at that time. And then the opportunity lost. The school system is the great enemy a lot of the time. There are good people in it. I'm not slamming all teachers,
No.
but there's a bureaucracy there that
Having
is
been a
very-
teacher, I would say that a great many teachers should be slammed. They don't follow the curriculum properly. They don't pay attention to children in the right way. And they do it early on in a child's development that they destroy children early. I was a first grade teacher in a pretty low income area. And the children there in first grade, I would say 60% of my class did not read, was not prepared for reading. They were sent from kindergarten, not prepared for reading. They were on such a low level, some of them, that they could barely understand what was going on in first grade. And I was working with that group and move them, the very, very low ones, to the point where they were okay, like at the end of kindergarten. So they were, some of them were like beginning of kindergarten when I got them.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
then I
know that-
moved them to the end of kindergarten.
Yeah.
And so the ones that had been at the end of the only few, there were like 3 or 4 children in that class who actually moved to where they were at first grade level, the end of first grade level. Some of them moved to like middle of first grade. That was great. But only 3 or 4, I felt, were ready to go to second grade.
Yeah, well, there are systemic problems. I mean, when I went through,
Hold on, if I can
I'm-
just interrupt for a moment, we have a question or comment from the audience.
Okay.
Hi, I have an 11-year-old son who's currently being tested for dyslexia. I was wondering
Okay.
if you guys could give me advice of what I could do with the school system to help his journey, because it looks like he will get dyslexia results as positive because I'm dyslexic as well.
okay,
Well, you don't get,
Rob,
yeah,
Barbara,
Yeah.
you are the,
you don't get dyslexia, you know? That's the thing, that it's part of a child's development. They're not going to get dyslexia. If the child is dyslexic, the child was born with dyslexia.
No,
So
she
what I would
didn't-
say is be
you misunderstood.
persistent.
She wasn't saying the child was getting, she was getting the diagnosis, not the disease.
Oh, okay, no, okay,
So
sorry.
my response to the question would be
Be
that
persistent.
once you have the diagnosis in a letter in your hand, you can make things happen. Now, I don't know about the school system where you are. I'm in Alberta. But usually if you go to our principal with that letter, they will make accommodations. It's often a question at the start of the year of educating the teacher assigned to your kid what exactly they need in terms of adjustments, right? So some teachers are very willing to do that, and others are assholes, no other word for it. So in grade 7, my daughter had a teacher who took this dyslexic kid, and his entire class was based on read the textbook, fill in the random blanks on my worksheets, which is a terrible teaching method for any kid. And I said, look, it makes no sense for my kid to read letter by letter through the textbook at a type that's too small for her, right? To transfer letters into a blank letter by letter. Where is the learning in that? And his response to me, well, what else could I do? And my answer is any one of 40 other techniques that my student teachers have to learn, or I fail their ass out of the program. If all you can do is, worksheets, it's because you're a lazy shit. And I'd like to take your license away. Unfortunately, that wasn't within my power. So some teachers are useless. Some are fantastic. The next year we got a teacher who got his master's not only in education, but in neuroscience education. And that guy went nuts over my kid because he wanted so hard to practice all the stuff he learned. And she just blossomed in his class. So try and get your kid in classes with sympathetic teachers. The principal should help you with that. And that diagnosis will open doors that without it, it's much harder. In some jurisdictions, I don't know what it's like in Manitoba, there's actual funding available for them to bring in stuff like get the software on the computers in the school and so on. So once you have the diagnosis, you're way ahead of the game. And just your understanding and the kids' understanding, nobody's going to do that stupid and lazy thing. And that's the most important, get the kids' self-image up.
yeah,
I
very
agree.
much so. And I will say this. I was in the special class for pretty much my entire grade school career. And one of the great stupidities that the school system did was every school I went to that had a special class, just down the hall was a class for people who were mentally retarded. I know that's not a politically correct term, but that's what they were. And kids are very cruel and kids do not draw distinctions. So we were both in special classes and the kids would surround us and yell, Tardo, Tardo, Tardo. And when you already have the thing of you're struggling, that is painful, that is devastating. And be aware that these things do go on, and that as a parent, you need to have some say and some defense for it.
Also, could I add one thing? When she is or he is in a testing situation, make sure that they have provisions for your child so that they will not be in a situation where they can't function as well as they should. Maybe your child will need more time. Maybe your child will need extra help somehow in deciphering words. I mean, there's a lot of things that you as a parent should be, I would say, mostly be proactive. Just keep on and be persistent and proactive. And what Ralph said was perfectly right. You know, you need to have a teacher who feels that your child deserves that extra help and will give it to them.
And in life,
Yeah.
find the things that your child excels at and let them do them.
Right, like
So that
sports or
they have something where they can say, I'm good at this.
music. Maybe they're good at music, dance, art.
Yeah.
That kind of
But-
thing will build up their self-esteem, and then, you know, and that will bring them to want to read.
Yeah,
Also,
I have two pieces of advice myself. First is that with respect to your child, don't make a big deal of it. Don't call attention to it. Don't dwell on it for the kid, because that'll make the kid feel self-conscious. It'll make them feel inferior. It'll lead to a lot of second guessing. It should be business as normal. It should be just normal life for the kid. You know, you help them where they need it. And where you really want to push is with the system. And let's be very, very honest. Teachers are not your friends. The principal's not your friend. They're not there to be your friend. They don't really care. So there's no need to kiss their ass. So feel free to push. Feel free to stand on your rights. Feel free to advocate strongly, and don't worry about, you know, inconveniencing them, because, you know, they certainly won't care about inconveniencing you or your child's life. I mean, that's very cold-blooded, but this is the reality.
Not all teachers are like that, but some.
Tom,
Yeah, well, you know what? All it takes is some.
I
right,
know, unfortunately, I knew too many, but I was a teacher for 20 years. So
Yeah, and yeah, sure, there are good teachers and you can have good relationships with them. But the bottom line is that it's more important for you to look after your child than to have a good relationship with the teacher. The priority of your child comes first, and if you can have a good relationship with your teacher while pursuing that priority, yeah, that's just great. That's so fucking wonderful. But if it comes down to a choice, then choose your kid over the teacher.
that I would second that. It's really true. And as a mother, I could say that always think of your child first. Always. Your child's welfare is the most important thing.
well, we were lucky, we had resources, so I simply pulled my kid out of that school in the end with the stupid teachers, and then put her in another school, you know, when the opportunity arose with the good teachers. So I would start from the assumption that your teacher is ignorant and doesn't know, but that they're open to being educated because they're in education. That means some of them like learning. So go in with suggestions and brownies, right? And then
It always helps, yes.
when the cupcakes don't work, then take on Den's approach and demand your rights. But
Yeah.
first, be nice, polite first, then then hard line.
You know, well, that's basically a good rule for life in general.
I agree.
You start off with the velvet glove, and then if you get treated badly, out comes the iron fist. I did want to just quickly go over a few things that I found that are useful as a dyslexic writer. Hahnemans are their own special kind of Tartarus. And one of the most useful things I found was to make up little self-explanatory sentences that I can reference back to, like 2 O's are too many to do a task. I hear with my ear that you came over here. They're over there with their dog. And it's very useful to make up a few things like that because it becomes a quick reference that you can go back to and it places it in context.
Yeah, those synonyms. Yeah, the homonyms are like the worst
Yes.
for people who are dyslexic, I think.
And if you're doing any kind of writing, do a quick edit at the end of the day so that you can come back to it the next day and actually read what you've written. Because I've run into the thing of writing a page and going, what the hell is that word? Later, you edit again and again and again until it's perfect. And I have choose one version of English and stick to it because that English, American, Canadian.
I'm sorry,
Social
I'm
media
American.
is social media. Is that social? I mean, if a deaf person is giving a speech, they will practice with an oscilloscope until they have very distinct speech. But nobody faults them when they're just in a public venue for having the muted quality that most the deaf people have. I mean, tribute to them, honor to them, incredible effort, incredible achievement that they can speak at all. I mean, wow. And I'm blown away that they can do that they can put in that degree of effort. But, you know, as a dyslexic, you'll run into these grammar trolls on Facebook and so forth. Who cares that you put the wrong kind of die into a casual correspondence? And I that's more a pet peeve than anything else, but
I have to tell you, not only dyslexic people have trouble on Facebook and in Messenger, and I don't, as a grammar person, I don't ever fault anyone for anything that happens in those areas because I have had it happen to me. It can happen. So you have to give a little, like you said, you know, just that's a great idea. Oh, all your ideas are great.
If I could add one more, one thing we found quite helpful was the Got It spell checker, GHOTIT, Got It. It's designed for dyslexia. So when my kids were the most dyslexic they were, where they couldn't spell, they would put together what looked to me to be a random collection of letters, and Got It would take it and give them the right word. Well, you probably meant to spell this word. So there's an underlying logic to dyslexia that even I as a dyslexic can't understand. So that's a really useful tool. And again, most school systems will put that on their system-wide. Once you tell it's $150 or something, right? And it's good for individuals. So when you come back to your thing the next day and say, I don't know what I wrote, try running it through that one and it'll tell you.
All right, I'm gonna cut people off now. We're in our last few minutes, and I'd like to ask people for concluding statements. Before that, I'm just going to throw it to the audience. Does anyone have questions or comments?
How do
Okay.
you spell got it again?
How do you spell got it?
GHOTIT.
Jhotit.
Thank you.
O-T-I,
I'm trying
got
to
it.
I spell cat.
H-O-T-I-T.
IT. So it's got it with an extra letter in it, right? Typical dyslexic behavior.
Oh, okay.
And one other thing I'd like to say about spell checkers, the new word spell checker, where it gives pseudonyms to the spelling, is, I found, a godsend, because often a spell checker will give you a list of potential spellings. They're all correct words. You don't know which one it is. It could be any one of the 5. But if it has the pseudonyms beside it, okay, now you know what the meaning of that word is, and you can pick the right one.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Now, I'm just going to ask people to wrap it up. It's 9 o'clock. We've got another panel coming along. I'm sure some people are waiting for those. So, Stephen, final words?
Just never let it stop you, and search for the hidden advantages. There are some.
Robert?
Same sort of thing. I think I discovered that I have strengths now in those areas because I overcompensated. So the main thing is to tell your kids, you're not doomed because you have this condition. There are ways to work around it. And in the long run, it might even make you better at it.
Okay. Barbara?
Well, I would just say, if you find that your student, your child is not getting what they need from the teacher, then I would either, as Robinson, take them out of the class or find somebody who can work with them. I mean, there are therapists that work with children who are dyslexic, and they do a good job. And so get extra help is what I was saying. Don't let them sit there in that environment, because that's deadly. That's all I can say. And work on their strengths, make them feel good about themselves, give them things that'll make them feel good about themselves, and just keep giving them the truth. You know, that's important.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I know that you can't see the audience, but there is an audience here. So what I'm going to do is ask everybody to give a round of applause.
Okay, well, I'm going to close it down then and start the next one. Thanks, everybody. It was a great panel.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.